We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining host and her guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here's your host, Leaha Mattinson.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's show. I'm so excited that each and every one of you has joined us from wherever you are on this beautiful planet that we inhabit. I'm Leaha Mattinson, and I'm joined today by my wonderful guest, Dr. David Hardy. David, how are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
That's awesome. Awesome. So Dr. Dave has now been on with me for a few episodes, and we're going to dive into some pretty heavy subject matter today, but the stuff that really could be life-changing for people who are trying to change their neurology around things and finding that they're struggling in their life with success in every area, whether that's business, personal relationships, or just the satisfaction of kind of their day-to-day functioning. So Dr. Dave is a very comprehensively trained functional neurologist, a chiropractor. He works out of the Collegiate Sports Medicine Center in good old Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. Woo woo! And so we're very, very excited to again have you and your expertise here, Dr. Dave. So just curious, who is this kind of information for that we're going to be diving into today is really kind of healthy sexuality. And then we're going to get into more of we're going to recap a little bit of what we talked about on the last episode. So for people who didn't have a chance to listen, please go back and listen or go to masteryourlife.ca and look for the video. So you may have heard the audio somewhere, but you might want to see Dr. Dave and I in person. And so you can do that on the website, masteryourlife.ca. The last episode, we talked about healthy touch. This episode, we're going to talk about a little bit about what happens when it isn't healthy touch. So Dr. Dave, without further ado, who is this information really for?
Well, really, this is for everyone because all of us have physical aspects, whether we're trying to have, once again, an extra level of performance, whether it's with our relationships, with our partners, or whether it's just in life in general, or whether there's been something that's happened that affects our physical body as well. And then, of course, the pathways of neurology in our brain. So it really is for everyone. And then some people always ask, well, why would a chiropractor or an athletic therapist or anyone in the physical realm kind of dive into this area? And well, it's because we're seeing all these people and we're hands-on. It's a physical thing. So there's always that touch aspect with it. And we really need to dive into things deeper, I think, to better be able to serve the people who have had all this trauma and abuse as well. So it really is for everyone. And I guess the advocacy behind it is that we can really hone in even better with our skills if we know the basis of the pathways, neurology that's actually running this and how it affects emotionality and thoughts as well. So it really is kind of this dive into things and let's see if we can solve problems even better. And because there's a ton of people struggling out there and that really do need help. And then too, just everyone wants that extra level of performance to some extent as well. So it really is that spectrum from being able to function the best we possibly can to, okay, if there's something wrong, how do we fix it? Or potentially, how can we help the body to heal from difficult situations that have occurred?
Yeah, I love this. It's like from the boardroom to the bedroom. I often would say to clients in the past is like, you can have good performance here, but if you don't have it here, you're going to have problems. So women and men both. struggle with all kinds of things around sex and sexuality, and we can see it playing out in our society. And hasn't really changed. 30 years ago when I started out as a counselor for this school division in Provost, Alberta, the stats at that time were 1 in 3 girls were sexually abused and 1 in 5 boys. Yeah, and I don't think that's changed much. And kind of given also current other statistics, things that are coming out about predatory behaviors in men, in particular, who are shopping online now for sex partners, because there's been such a disconnect between men and women. It's so sad, but this is why we're doing these episodes. They're like touchy subjects, but we need to reclaim normal human relationships as opposed to these things that are offline. But 50% of men in Georgia, just to give a stat of how corrupt things have gotten, 50% of men went through an entire exercise of getting home from work. So this is guys who are just like middle income, 2.5 kids and a dog, a picket fence, and a wife that worked. Wife goes away for working, for holidays or whatever. Hubby's home and he orders a pizza and he thinks, oh, maybe I'll get a dating partner for the evening. And as the algorithm goes through, it keeps asking him, how much risk is he willing to assume on his side of the table? So first of all, it's okay, we're going to give you this kind of a partner. Okay, check. And then it comes back and says, well, we might not have somebody that's of age. Are you okay with that?
Wow.
And then check. Yep. So this is actually tested in Georgia. So this is recent. So yeah, and then it comes back for not just a third time, but a fourth time, and says, are you sure that you're okay with somebody that's underage? Check. And then the next one is absolutely 100% for sure it's going to be somebody underage. You still want to go ahead with it. And guess the number of people that actually said, yeah, they were okay.
Yeah, I would not even want to guess on that one.
51%. 51%. And so really distressing, because what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for such an abnormal society when this kind of permissive stuff happens. So when we have really satisfying self-love, and when we have really satisfying love in our relationships with other people, not just sexual relationships, but just relationships in general, we don't kind of participate in that stuff. We're not part of that equation that's feeding it. But behind the scenes, there's all of this other energy that's happening all the time around sex and sexuality that is it's corrupt, we'll call it that, for lack of a better term. So one of the big goals of having these conversations is getting people back into their own bodies, and going, okay, what's going on in my body? What's going on in here? Do I know myself? Am I performing at my best? And then how do I bring that out? And we do that through consciousness, and consciousness is helped along by functional neurology. So really understanding how your brain functions, and then being able to go, all right, well, how do I get this wild rodeo under control?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I've always used the analogy that I'm looking at the hardware, and that mental health counseling, psychology, and coaching are looking at the software. So I'm looking at the pathways, the physical side of things, and the experts in their field with dealing with the emotional side are key components. But I think there's been such a disconnect between the two for such a long period of time that we really do need to start merging brain health with mental health as well.
Yes, agreed. I'm very fortunate to have had training from Mantak Chia, who's my grandmaster. So my master in Qigong is Lee Holden, and his master is Grandmaster Mantak Chia. Mantak was one of the first people in Eastern sort of medicine to come over here and teach about sexual energy and taking care of and he was very outrageous, but he was very effective. Right. Because he was actually doing this hardware upgrade. So it wasn't just like talkity talk. It was very specific exercises that you do yourself to actually get your Jing Qi under control and knowing what it is that will create a healthy body and healthy relationships. So I understood, again, from my counseling background, that wasn't actually, that wasn't happening through counseling alone, because people had trauma. They had like physical trauma of concussions, which you and I talked about in our first episode together. They might have fallen off a bicycle. They might, birth problems, all this. but there's also this other trauma that happens through the abuse of the body. So can we dive into, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like, think of the most stressful situation you've had, or just on a day-to-day basis, and what that does to your body. Now imagine a horrible traumatic event and what's going to happen to the body as well. There's physical damage being done with all of these. And when I was teaching in a at-risk behavioral school here in Red Deer, in a previous life when I was in education, we had students that had been abused, and they were ramped up. Like, the littlest things could set them off, and it all stems once again from what happened and how the body's holding on to that, and how the whole system's being affected by that trauma, that stressful situation. And they're really not getting the help for that they probably should be getting. Like, and on your discovery, did you have to find this out on your own, or did somebody kind of guide you into kind of more the body physical healing side of things as well?
Yeah, great question. I had to find it out on my own. It was just, there was no teachers. And I just went, I can see counseling isn't working. Medicine isn't going to work here. Like, I just went, you can't drug something and expect it to heal. So that didn't make any sense to me. So that's why I've always been I feel better when I do something physically with my body, for sure. That relieves things, and it gets me out of my head. But I still knew that when I came back into my body, that I didn't actually still would make, not necessarily great decisions. So it's been a curious journey around that whole healing, but also the secrecy that's around sexual abuse, the secrecy that's held because you don't want to actually talk about anything, because again, you really don't think people are going to be able to fix it, because the evidence is that we see out there that most people who are abused really don't fix it, that they've got still like major problems choosing good partners, problems with protecting their own offspring. Yeah, and many other things. What are some of the things that you see in clinic that you just go, okay, well, here's a presentation of something where I need to ask some questions around their life experience?
Right. When practicing in the US there, we were doing higher end stuff too, like especially with the diagnostics. So I was looking at QEEG, so brain mapping, looking at the electrical activity of different parts of the brain and seeing how they were firing. And in a few that disclosed that, yeah, they had this trauma in their past or sexual abuse. What I noticed, and some of this was like decades past, and it stuck out to me when they mentioned it, and looking through the brain map, that the right parietal lobe, which is responsible for body perception per se, wasn't firing properly, and more so than any other part of the brain. And then of course the caudate system, which kind of attaches physical to emotional to kind of cognitive, that usually had issues, and we could see this in real time. So yeah, I kind of need to go back, pile through the research and see if that's being recorded as well. But just clinically, that's in a few cases, that's what I was seeing. And then physically, what you'd see is, once again, a system that's overactive, that is just firing way too much. And yeah, you'd check the light response in the pupils, and they would just go haywire. And this once again, very reactive system to any sensory stimulation going into it. And it almost seemed that some of these patients, they kind of started to not recognize their own body, or I would imagine, sort of had a feeling of maybe disgust of their own self after this. And we were seeing it in the neurophysiology.
And disgust is such a huge control mechanism, isn't it?
No, massive. Yeah.
Well, I learned something. No, it's just like, okay, then. Yes, because it is. So what would you say clinically then when you say that people would maybe have the like they wouldn't maybe have a good read on their own body image. How would they present in clinic? Like, would they be overweight, underweight? Like, what were they not seeing? Was it or harsh judgment of themselves, more so like a verbal thing, or under reporting pain, or over reporting, or the whole mass of it all? What were some of the things?
Absolutely all of the above that you mentioned there. Yeah, so you would notice that they usually did have an increased amount of body fat, and you'd run tests on basically body recognition. So you touch one point, they'd have their eyes closed, and they'd come over and try to find that point on their arm, say, and they'd be way off. So they really did, like, that part of the brain really stopped recognizing their own body, and you'd see that body sensation decrease, and then of course you'd see the fight or flight system increase in function. So yeah, it was a lot of physical stuff showing up.
Mm-hmm. So there's fight, flight, freeze, and dissociate.
Right.
And so when you guys were looking at those kind of things, or when you were looking at that, could you see the difference between when somebody was actually in whatever the state was? Like, so like fight looks like a particular thing. Flight looks like a particular thing. Freeze is like when you're just standing there not doing anything, hoping that the thing will pass. And dissociate is when you actually compartmentalize and leave your body, for lack of a better term. So you're not even there. You're just
right.
You're just somewhere else.
Yeah.
So could you see that in the tests? Like, I mean, I know that's pretty sentient, but were you able to see that? Or people report it back to you?
I would have to dive into that more. That's interesting. Interesting perspective on that. I think too, so much of it would have to do with more of an intense situation versus a little test where you're dealing with touch, or say, once again, looking at the pupils and the autonomic response. So definitely a lot less stimulating than, say, putting them into a stressful situation where they've got to react. And yeah, do you get out of that enclosed room per se, or do you kind of give up and try to take your mind to a different place? Mm-hmm. Is that how the nervous system is running in reaction to that trauma or stress that's going on? So yeah, to make the short answer, no, I wasn't per se able to see it in the little neurologic tests, and didn't dive into the questioning, but that would be very interesting to kind of have the take on.
Right, because that might actually help with whatever the healing modality is, which is the real reason for doing the Master Your Life show, is like, where am I now? Where is it I want to be? If I know that I've been struggling with in my life, that either sexually abused at whatever age, what are all the traumas along the way? Because the other thing with sexual abuse, typically, maybe you can speak to this, is do people just have the one trauma, or when you've been traumatized one time, is there multiple traumas because of the first one doing something to you neurologically that stops you from protecting yourself? Do you have any sort of insight about that?
I would imagine that, yeah, once again, the repetitive trauma is going to lead to more of a hopelessness, mm-hmm. and more of that dissociative feeling that you've been describing. Whereas maybe a single traumatic event is, once again, going to lead to more the fight or flight, get out of that situation type deal.
Mm-hmm. And so what typically presents in your clinic, would you say, around the sexual abuse issue? And then is it a certain age group? Is it men, women? Is it all sort of different genres of people? Right.
It's been different within the clinics that I've traveled to. Mm-hmm. But the general population statistics are the same as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So even though, like, right now I'm mainly treating concussion athletes and people coming in for musculoskeletal pain, just with the statistics that a lot of them are dealing with a past trauma or abuse.
Mhm.
and you're that's kind of in the back of your mind. Whereas when I was practicing in other centers, yes, we'd have a handful of referrals from counselors, and we were working on, once again, the neurology side of it, the hardwiring. And yeah, people would put down that, yeah, I've had this past trauma, abuse, or this addiction. And then it made a lot more sense with the diagnostic testing. What parts of the brain and nervous system were we looking at?
Right.
So it's been, yeah, different from clinic to clinic, but the statistics and the amount of people that have gone through this are going to be, once again, extremely high.
Mhm.
And even like working with athletes now, you're starting to hear more and more athletes coming forward with their stories of abuse.
Mhm.
And these are people coming in, once again, trying to get their bodies at top level shape. And
Right.
sometimes your therapies are going to work better on one athlete versus another. And you're kind of like, okay, well, what's the reason behind that? And probably in a handful of them, it's that, yeah, they did have an abuse or trauma, and that's really impacting their physical side of things, even in a top performing athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this conversation because I think, again, that our specific audience, people who listen to this show, I love you. Let me just say, because I know that you're all trying to kind of achieve, and that is sort of athletic, so there's this want to be better, to do better, to understand yourself more. And so while you might not be a former Olympic, or elite athlete, you might just be somebody who's managing your home or a bunch of kids or a business. And you're going, why can't I actually figure this thing out? You don't need to be an Olympic athlete or an elite athlete to want to be a really excellent life manager and to have an excellent life. And that's who tunes in to these broadcasts. So not only for yourself, but for other people, your brothers, your sisters, your energetic brothers and sisters, just be thinking about who you know personally that might be struggling with something in their life and who should be tuning into this episode. Because again, the idea is also to be able to start having discussions about these things that are more the data, less of the drama. So what I see is lots of people get hooked into the drama of the story, and they don't then have tools. They just stay stuck in that absolute hellhole of that story, and they never transcend it because they don't have tools to do it. So when we talk about tools to do it, Dave, you're not doing frontal lobotomies and you're not opening up people's skulls to take a look in there and take out the little parts that are not working. This is not a cellular kind of, you're not doing that. So what is it that you do in your clinic? Let's talk about what you do at the clinic, and then let's talk about what people can maybe even do at home to start opening up those things. Like, what's going on in my brain if this has happened to me? And then how do I fix it?
Right. So what I do is I'm looking at what parts of the brain are overactive. So basically the neurons are just firing way too quickly, more than they should, or what part of the brain is underactive. The neurons are just too slow to fire, and things just aren't happening with that particular part of the nervous system. And then, of course, trying to get it as close to basically how we think it should fire. So really the biggest thing is to look at the roadmap, and the roadmap is the neurologic examination. So I can dive into huge detail on basically different responses with the neurologic examination. And the neurologic examination's been there for years, and basically it's predominantly used in the medical field to find pathologies. And movements are a huge one. And you just did one for the Parkinson's test or Huntington's, where you're looking at speed and accuracy of movements. So the fine detail of the fingers are going to be very cognitively based. And then, of course, more truncal muscles are going to be closer in. The brain only fires nerves out down the spinal cord to two basic general areas, and that's going to be muscles and glands. So you can tell a lot by different facial expressions, eye movements, and just how people are walking. And you're going to notice this too when you're just looking around and seeing people unconsciously. You're going to be like, oh, that person's maybe got some slowness going on, some degeneration. And then backtracking, well, what caused that? And it was really interesting after the last podcast we did. I started talking to one of the pelvic therapists here as well.
Oh, great.
So we started diving into those primitive reflexes and basically how that sensory stimulation stimulates all those fine detailed muscles within the pelvis, and the different reflexes that can happen, but also later in life that declines. And during life, if there's trauma or something, it's going to affect all that firing of different muscles. So yeah, when we look later in life that, oh, geez, bladder function's not working as well. Well, what caused that? Was it a developmental issue? Was it a trauma-based issue? There's all sorts of reasons why that connection between the brain and the muscles that control daily functions that are embarrassing to talk about aren't working.
Right. Oh, we're talking about them.
Exactly.
It is important to talk about them because somebody has to take care of people as they age, so a lot of times people actually even get rid of their loved one because the taking care of them becomes too much in the area of all of the stuff that's below the belly button, so above the belly button, they can handle most things, but below the belly button, that's just too much because it's messy. It's like when babies come into the world and they're doing their thing and people go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I signed up for this.
Right.
On the way out, it's the same thing. So what we tend to do though is shuffle people away, as opposed to in Chinese medicine, or probably with your practice and with your friend who's the pelvic person, really do look at how do we actually make the energy better here? How do we make the function better here so that people actually also maintain their dignity? Because that's all connected to that disgust thing you mentioned earlier on too, is that we, for some reason, think all these bodily functions are disgusting. They're what's keeping us alive. When that stuff shuts down, you're a dead duck, folks. So
absolutely.
yes. So let's talk about or share with me what also your pelvis person said about the importance of actually having good pelvic floor strength. For example, like what nerves are in there. And because a lot of people, again, will think if I sit at my desk all day, it's okay. But it's like you use it or lose it with a lot of these muscles. I use a stand-up desk myself, have for as long as I possibly can, because I like to be able to actually do work on my pelvic floor all the time because I feel better when I do. So can you just speak to maybe what people might be shutting down, what neurology or nerves are maybe changing, and how that can affect them in their day-to-day functioning?
Right. Yeah, we went into this a bit with performance, which was exciting. And I say performance, but what I mean too is like, geez, like everyone who's middle-aged starts to realize decline. So if you're noticing decline, then you're looking at performance, how to stay in better, younger type shape. And yeah, the brain fires down through these different homologous columns, basically different parts of the nervous system. So then the midbrain is going to be that real dopaminergic, go out and do things, fight or flight system. Then you've got your pons medulla, which are going to be bodily functions and sensation, more serotonergic and that type. Then you run into the cervical plexus, which deals with limbs. There's primitive reflexes with that get it to start firing up. Then you go into your thoracic sympathetic part of the system firing down. And then your lumbar plexus, which fires into, once again, limbs, but also a lot of the pelvic muscles that are going to be the base of your legs and limbs there. And of course, there's all sorts of sensations flowing through there too. So it's also going to be the nerves that go to the genitals. And I believe that there's some primitive reflexes there as well. The one that I go into is like, have you ever scratched your dog's belly and see its legs start to just shoot out?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
it can lick itself and not have that reflex. So basically, these primitive reflexes, when they're not integrated in the body, are very heightened ticklish areas, and almost like a tickle sensation that goes into the muscles too. And basically, from a performance aspect or with your partner, those ticklish areas you want to stimulate so that that part of the nervous system is actually firing better, because it was never integrated properly.
Right.
So that's kind of one of those sexual performance hacks out there is, know those ticklish areas that are heightened overreactive response to stimulate those and get them working better, because those also fire into kind of the same web-like formations that deal with other muscles in that pelvic area, and of course all the functions that's related with it, whether it's going 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah. And this is really important, I think, for people to consider a bit more, because the mistaken myth about sex is that everything happens again below the belly button. And a lot of things happen way like in the brain before that. We've got so much skin on our body, like we're covered in skin, whatever miles of it. I'm not even sure how much. You'd probably be able to answer that, Doc. But all that skin has nerve endings in it. And so if you're really actually wanting to explore this with your partner, start at the top of their head and work your way down, or, don't assume that everything is going to happen. And this is part of that whole porn sort of how people have been taught and trained about sex, is that it's this crazy elevator scene or some violent thing in an action movie that is not satisfying for most women, I can tell you, gentlemen. Right. So this whole slowing it down and actually going, all right, well, how do I actually find all those ticklish spots? And they're everywhere. They're in our hair, they're under our eyebrows, around our cheeks, so you can spend just a ton of time exploring that part before you ever get into the rest of anything, and stimulate. Why is it important to do that, would you say?
And yeah, if we wanted to wrap another layer around it, we can go into the difference between male and female brains. Like there are differences, and whether you can actually see it on a scan or whether it's more functional, which most of it is, of course, there's differences. And women, their brains seem to work more with timing, and of course everything in the brain is timing, and then also the distance between areas. So timing between left and right brain too, there's different functions between left and right brain. Left is going to be your go forward side. Your right is going to be more you're in your own body. So there is this play of rhythm between the two. And and the whole sexual performance is too going to be different between the sexes. And you're going to notice that, to kind of bring things to threshold where it's more pleasurable, you need to excite other areas of the nervous system before you go for the big home run.
Right.
And that's a huge difference too, to really kind of go down that rabbit hole. There's different sensory stimulation through the years, like that's being recognized in a lot of Eastern medicines for years too. So there's all sorts of preferences too, like which ear do you prefer to hear with is going to be huge too. And like all of this, of course, sex is the biggest sensory stimulation that we can get. It's a physical act, and all of that gives us, once again, this huge, great feel-good emotion if it's done at the proper time. And if it's not, then it turns into, once again, something that should be this very pleasurable act and a part of an adult life that turns into absolute sheer terror and horror in some people, because it was done improperly. And now that sensory stimulation is now associated with something that is unpleasurable and horrible versus something that was very pleasurable and bonding and something of joy and pleasure.
Right, right. This is really important for a multitude of reasons. And we can talk about sex all day, but what I want to talk about is good sex. So how do people actually who've been traumatized, who've got these problems in the areas of your brain that you've been able to identify through your testing, how can they explore that for themselves and go, okay, maybe I do have some damage here. How can is there self-healing things that people can do? Or do they need to go and see a functional neurologist? Or what would be kind of, if you were sitting at home trying to figure out what the next steps were, if you're self-identifying, go, my love life isn't that good. I don't really enjoy sex that much. I really don't want to give all to my partner. I don't want to share all this, whatever, because every time I start down that path, then boom, something happens and I'm not interested anymore. So how can we help people to actually change that, knowing that it's their brain that is messing this stuff up for them, that's tripping them up?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
The first step is always to see somebody in the counseling mental health field that's equipped and skilled to deal with the thoughts of the trauma and everything. Then after that, it's once again, how do you reconnect with your body? Mm-hmm. So finding different pleasurable activities to actually take pride in how your body works and function, would see as being the first step. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different at home things you can do that once again are going to be that, okay, well, my body is actually worth something and is very, very important, and start to develop that self-love. The other thing is, of course, is calming down these overactive parts of the nervous system that are once again closer to threshold, that when something kind of mimics anything close to what that traumatic event is, if those neurons are still very close to firing, then of course people might have flashbacks. So looking at ways to kind of calm down those primitive parts of your brain that are just responding to the things coming into it are going to be key. And a lot of that too is going to be, once again, how do we calm down our physiology? So a lot of more the parasympathetic activities, the deep breathing, meditation, relaxation stuff that is really difficult. Mm-hmm. Especially in today's society, just with normal stress being topped onto things, is calming down that overactive flight, freeze,
parasympathetic system.
Yeah. So we really need to fire into that. And then of course there's left versus right brain. So usually people are going to become more left brain dominant because they want to react to their outside world versus their internal world. So looking at different ways to fire more into the right brain might be something that's warranted in a lot of cases as well. So anything that we can control is basically going to be opposite side of the body firing into the other side of the brain. Anything we can't control usually fires down the same path, same side. So looking at different like yoga, balance, physical activity, touch more on, once again, kind of that left side firing to the right brain might be a goal as well. But then, if there's things that are still happening, then seeking out somebody who's gone more through the neuroscience and the brain body connection that can help you out would be ideal to help you along any pathway
of healing. Of healing
or peak performance, or to just, once again, not decline with aging as quickly as things happen. So
Right.
there's all those aspects out there, and there's more and more people doing it. And once again, my major point is that the more information practitioners have and the general public have on how the nervous system works, then the better the results are going to be with any situation or any physical findings that are happening in your body.
Right. Love it.
The situation.
Yeah, love it. The causal things that are happening in the brain. I think the brain is the seat of everything that happens that's in your life. And if you heal your brain, you can heal everything.
Absolutely.
That's my practice. Here's a cultural funny thing, a way that I shifted things around the whole sexual abuse thing. Because we come into this culture thinking that we're going to meet Prince Charming or going to meet a pretty good partner. And I think men, same thing. It's like, we're going to, as little people, it's like, we're not really thinking about the threat and the harm. Other cultures, they wake up in the morning and they're afraid for the time of them being very little, because there's lots of rape that's very apparent. They see it outside their doors. They see the wives and the women in the villages often being traumatized. So their expectation of sex is different. They almost expect that they're going to have some harm done to them. And why I'm inviting people to think about it is, when you expect that, then you actually go, I need to have tools and resources to be able to deal with this, because it's something that happens in my culture and I know I need to deal with it. And even though we have this sort of naive idea that there should be all this Prince Charming and I'm going to be protected and things are going to be all right, and same for the guys, I'm going to go through life unscathed in this area of sex and sexuality. The truth is, with the 50% or 51% of people who are actually doing these other things against that, that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the truth is we're in a war zone and we've got to acknowledge it. And once you kind of do, then you go, okay, well then, what do I do about actually protecting myself in this real war zone that is happening external to me? Even though there's all this nice stuff happening between people and et cetera, there's also lots of other things that are not nice happening. And I need that when you understand that, you're not alone. You go, wow, 50% of people are getting abused. Half the people who are sitting across the room from me have gone through this experience. And then all of a sudden, it's not this isolated thing. It's like, whoa, it's like all these people are going through trying to heal this thing. And so then you're not feeling disgusted. You look at other people with compassion and yourself and you go, okay, well, I can see all these people who are overweight. If 70% of those people were sexually abused, like if you look into our society right now and see the number of people who are overweight or struggling with weight issues, you get a better comprehension of actually just how prevalent this stuff is. And then you go, I'm not alone. Why would I feel disgust about this? I should be absolutely in reverence for this wonderful body that continues to want to express itself and be with other people and play with other people. And then how do I just make the best of this with the things that have happened? And so that shifts some things neurologically too, because that is shifting the idea of blame and disgust into reverence. And going, whoa, okay.
Yep.
Reverence and heard. I'm with everybody else here. In fact, it's the exception, probably for the most part, for people who haven't had some sort of trauma. Those are like the 1 to 3% of the population who really haven't had something happen to them, whether that's sexual abuse or concussion or coming into a family that has just lots of arguing and fighting and stress that causes neurological change. Lack of anything, lack of resources. Right now, the kids who are being born into this crisis mode of parents are all going to come out differently neurologically wired. And if we're going to help them, we've got to have the skills to do that as parents, as grandparents. Like I'm a grandparent of 4. I look at my grandchildren and go, what am I doing here to create health and wellness and good functional relationships with my business associates, with my partners, with my family, so that they're learning that and not the stuff that could get pushed through from that filter of abuse, right? So the withholding love, then not being physically active in your body because you've had trauma. So one of the most fun things is I get to play with my grandkids all the time. I play with them. I'm down on the floor. I pick them up. I throw them around. Whatever. They throw me around. Okay. They don't throw me around, but it's fun. We have fun. And because I don't carry a bunch of extra weight, I did Like I gained 100 pounds however many years ago and took it off because I figured out what caused it, which was that abuse.
Wow.
And then I was intentional about rewiring my brain. I just went, this is not for me. I didn't create this. Why am I self-harming? Why would I ever do this to myself? This body didn't do that to itself. That person did that to me, and I need to do something about it so that I can be a healthy mom and a healthy grandmother. And at that time it was healthy mom because that was 20 plus years ago now, but it was really intentional, and knowing that my brain was telling me a bunch of baloney, right? Just going, yeah. So,
and that's like you hit on it right there with the self-harm part. Basically, when people have, like, the brain's used to sticking into a pattern. So when there's the negative plasticity, something's horrible has happened, it reinforces itself. And we know it's not good, but the brain likes to stick in a pattern, and it's uncomfortable to make any changes. So that's one of the reasons people self-sabotage as well, or continue on with some of these patterns, is there hasn't been anything that's gone in there and disrupted how the brain's actually firing into this pattern. So there's all sorts of things out there that hopefully will get more and more research behind it into how to break those loops and patterns that continue to reinforce themselves in the brain. The old saying, neurons that fire together wire together. It goes with learning something good, but it also happens when things a huge impact into that part of the nervous system happens, and it's learned it. So the brain reinforces itself,
which is exciting. People go, oh damn, and I go, oh yeah, because you can change
exactly. Yeah, because we can have positive change to the brain or negative. So
every single moment of every day, you're wiring it.
We do it to be the life we want.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we're out of time, Dr. Dave. Darn. Maybe you'll come on again. We got lots to talk about. So everyone, anyone who wants to get a hold of Dr. David Hardy, you can check out the show notes on masteryourlife.ca. Dave, do you have any final words about how can people find a practitioner in their area?
Yeah, definitely start Googling and do your research on how much the person you're seeing has studied different neuroscience and what tools are available out there, because there's more and more popping up all the time now. So once again, you're looking at how can you reconnect your body with your brain and get it into a state that feels good for yourself again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Everyone, you want products for your brain, come to masteryourlife.ca. Check out Dave's other interviews with me. Thank you so much, Dave, for being a wonderful guest.
You're welcome.
Sharing your wisdom. Everybody, love yourselves, love each other, mind your minds. That's all for us. Bye for now.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life is a presentation of Leaha Mattinson Enterprises, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life, helping you to discover the very best of you.